On a frigid morning in July of 1944, Lieutenant Matali of the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm found himself in an exceptionally perilous predicament. His F4U Corsair, bearing the designation JT-44, had succumbed to a critical mechanical failure while flying over the Norwegian coastline. Beneath him lay enemy-occupied territory, German-controlled Norway, where capture would invariably lead to intense interrogation and prolonged confinement. With his engine coughing erratically and his altitude plummeting with alarming speed, Matali had no viable alternative but to attempt a desperate emergency landing in a field near the town of Bodo. What transpired next would offer German aviation specialists their inaugural in-depth examination of one of America's most formidable aerial combat machines. The discoveries they made would inspire both admiration and considerable apprehension. The distinctive bent-winged aircraft that crash-landed in that remote Norwegian field symbolized the pinnacle of American engineering prowess and industrial capability. As German technicians commenced their initial assessment of the captured Corsair, they were scrutinizing an aerial craft that had already begun to decisively alter the balance of power in the Pacific theater. But how had this come to pass? How had the Americans managed to engineer a fighter so advanced that it could surpass the speed and firepower of Germany's elite aircraft? And what were the ramifications for the pilots of the Luftwaffe, who might eventually confront these machines in aerial combat? To comprehend the profound shock experienced by the German aviation experts upon their analysis of the F4U Corsair, we must first journey back to 1938. It was then that the United States Navy issued one of the most ambitious sets of requirements in the annals of aviation history for a fighter aircraft. The Navy's objective was a carrier-based fighter capable of exceeding 400 miles per hour, a velocity that seemed nearly unattainable for a naval aircraft of that era. Most contemporary carrier fighters struggled to achieve speeds of 350 miles per hour. Furthermore, the inherent complexities of naval aviation operations, necessitating robust landing gear, arresting hooks, and folding wings, typically introduced additional weight and aerodynamic drag, further compromising performance. This formidable challenge was entrusted to the Chance Vought Corporation and their exceptionally gifted chief designer, Rex Bissell. Bissell and his team understood that conventional design approaches would fall far short of meeting the Navy's ambitious speed objective. They recognized the necessity to think unconventionally, to push the very boundaries of aerodynamic design and engine technology. Their innovative solution would ultimately evolve into one of the most instantly recognizable fighter designs in aviation history: the inverted gull wing configuration, which bestowed upon the Corsair its iconic and unmistakable silhouette. This unconventional wing arrangement was not a matter of aesthetic preference. It was a direct consequence of engineering imperatives. The Navy had stipulated that their new fighter should be propelled by the largest and most potent engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This colossal 18-cylinder radial engine produced an astonishing 2,000 horsepower. To effectively harness such immense power, the aircraft required an enormous propeller measuring 13 feet and 4 inches in diameter. This substantial propeller presented a significant engineering hurdle: how to achieve adequate ground clearance without necessitating an impractically long and heavy landing gear assembly. Bissell's team found their ingenious answer in the inverted gull wing. By angling the wing downward from the fuselage before curving it back upward towards the wingtips, they could position the landing gear attachment points at the wing's lowest curvature, thereby providing the essential clearance for the massive propeller while maintaining relatively short landing gear struts. This design also yielded aerodynamic benefits, allowing the wing to join the fuselage at a 90-degree angle, thereby minimizing drag at the critical juncture where the wing met the fuselage. When the prototype XF4U-1 first took to the skies on the 29th of May 1940, it unequivocally validated the efficacy of Bissell's radical design. During its maiden flight, test pilot Lyman Bullard propelled the aircraft to an astounding 404 miles per hour, marking it as the inaugural American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight. This was an extraordinary accomplishment. at a time when the German Messerschmitt Bf-19 and the British Supermarine Spitfire were finding it challenging to reach 360 miles per hour. The Americans had engineered a fighter that was more than 40 miles per hour faster. However, speed constituted only one facet of the Corsair's groundbreaking design. The aircraft incorporated numerous aerodynamic innovations that were years ahead of their time. The landing gear retracted entirely into flush, enclosed wheel wells, leaving the wing surfaces perfectly smooth, a feature that would not become standard on fighter aircraft for many years to come. The oil coolers were integrated seamlessly with the leading edge of the wing, utilizing meticulously designed air intakes that minimized drag while ensuring sufficient cooling. The Corsair's offensive armament was equally impressive. While most fighters of that era were equipped with a combination of machine guns and cannons or relied on smaller caliber weapons, the F4U was armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in its wings. Each gun carried 400 rounds of ammunition, providing pilots with substantial firepower for extended engagements. The concentrated fury of these 6 heavy machine guns could obliterate most enemy aircraft with a brief burst, and the high velocity of the 50 caliber rounds rendered them effective at greater ranges than their smaller counterparts. Despite its considerable promise, the Corsair's early operational service was marred by misfortune and frustration. The very long nose that housed the powerful R2800 engine created significant visibility issues for pilots attempting carrier landings. The cockpit was situated so far aft that pilots could barely discern the runway over the nose during the critical final approach phase of landing. This deficiency led to a series of perilous carrier trials in late 1942, during which test pilots struggled to safely land the aircraft aboard ship. The situation deteriorated to such an extent that the Navy temporarily suspended efforts to operate Corsairs from aircraft carriers. The fighter aircraft that had been meticulously designed for naval operations was deemed too hazardous for carrier deployment. Consequently, the Navy assigned the Corsair to the Marine Corps for land-based operations, while adopting the more forgiving Grumman F-6F Hellcat as its primary carrier-based fighter. This decision would prove to be exceptionally beneficial for the Marines, who were desperately in need of a high-performance fighter for their operations in the Pacific. Marine Corps fighter squadrons had been operating outdated Grumman F-4F Wildcats, aircraft that were outmatched by newer Japanese fighters and incapable of intercepting high-altitude Japanese bombers. The introduction of the Corsair into Marine squadrons would fundamentally transform the aerial conflict in the Pacific. The inaugural Marine Corps Air Squadron, VMF 124, arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in February of 1943. The Cactus Air Force, as the fighter squadrons based at Henderson Field were known, had been engaged in a constant struggle to maintain air superiority over the Solomon Islands. Japanese bombers routinely targeted Allied positions, and the existing Allied fighter aircraft often lacked the necessary performance to intercept them at significant altitudes. The Corsair's combat debut on February 14, 1943, was unremarkable. During a mission escorting B-24 Liberator bombers, the mixed formation of Army P-38 Lightnings, P-40 Warhawks, Navy bombers, and Marine Corsairs was ambushed by Japanese fighters. 8 American aircraft were lost, including 2 Corsairs. One F4U was destroyed in a mid-air collision with a Japanese Zero. This was hardly the dominant performance that had been anticipated from the new superfighter, but the Marine pilots swiftly learned to leverage the Corsair's advantages while mitigating its drawbacks. The crucial tactic was to avoid turning engagements with Japanese fighters, which were more agile at lower speeds, and instead to utilize the F4U's superior speed and climb rate to dictate the terms of the engagement. Corsair pilots developed tactics centered on high-speed passes, employing their speed advantage to attack and then disengage before the enemy could effectively retaliate. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 emerged as the first pilot to fully demonstrate the Corsair's latent capabilities. An experienced aviator who had been flying Marine aircraft since 1938, Walsh possessed an intuitive understanding of how to exploit the F-4U's performance advantages. On May 13, 1943, Walsh annihilated 3 Japanese aircraft in a single combat sortie, becoming the first Corsair ace and definitively proving that the bent-wing fighter could command the skies when operated with skill and precision. News of the Corsair's prowess spread rapidly through both Allied and Japanese ranks. Japanese pilots, accustomed to their advantage in maneuverability, found themselves confronting an adversary that could simply outdistance them. The F-4U could accelerate away from danger, ascend above attacking fighters, and dive at speeds that Japanese aircraft were incapable of matching. For the first time in the Pacific War, Japanese pilots faced a consistent disadvantage in dogfights. The psychological impact on Japanese aviators was profound. They began to harbor a palpable fear of the distinctive auditory signature produced by the Corsair's engine and propeller combination, which generated a characteristic whistling sound during high-speed dives. Japanese forces bestowed upon the F-4U the ominous moniker Whistling Death, a testament to both its acoustic profile and its devastating effectiveness in combat. As 1943 progressed, additional Marine squadrons transitioned to the Corsair, and the aircraft's combat record continued to improve. By the close of the year, Corsair pilots had achieved an astonishing 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, a level of air superiority almost unprecedented in aerial combat history. The fighter aircraft that had been deemed unsuitable for carrier operations by the Navy was proving itself to be one of the most formidable air superiority fighters of the entire conflict. However, the Corsair's influence extended beyond mere air-to-air engagements. The aircraft's robust construction and potent engine rendered it an exceptional fighter bomber, capable of carrying substantial bomb loads while retaining its air-to-air combat capabilities. Marine squadrons began employing the Corsair for close air support missions, assaulting Japanese ground installations with bombs and rockets while maintaining the capacity to defend themselves against enemy fighters. The F-4U's versatility became one of its most significant assets. Unlike specialized interceptors or ground attack aircraft, the Corsair could effectively perform multiple roles with equal proficiency. It could escort bombers on extended missions, conduct fighter sweeps to establish air superiority, attack ground targets with ordnance, and even undertake reconnaissance sorties. This flexibility made it an invaluable asset for Marine commanders, who frequently operated with limited resources and required aircraft that could adapt to evolving tactical circumstances. Concurrently, across the Atlantic, German aviation specialists were closely monitoring the development of Allied aircraft with keen interest. Intelligence reports emanating from the Pacific described a new American fighter exhibiting extraordinary performance characteristics, yet the full capabilities of the F-4U remained largely unknown to German analysts. They had encountered captured American aircraft previously. P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings had all been subjected to examination at German testing facilities. However, the Corsair, operating predominantly in the Pacific theater, remained an enigma. German pilots flying the Luftwaffe's premier fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf F-190, had cultivated a considerable degree of confidence in their aircraft's capabilities through years of combat over Europe. The Bf-109, in its latest iterations, could attain speeds approaching 400 miles per hour and possessed excellent climb performance and agility. The WWII was widely regarded as the world's finest all-around fighter, harmoniously blending speed, firepower, and ruggedness into a package that had dominated Allied fighters upon its introduction in 1941. However, intelligence reports from the Pacific suggested that the Americans had developed something truly exceptional. Descriptions of the Corsair's performance seemed almost too improbable to be true. Speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour, climb rates surpassing those of most German fighters, and a firepower capable of destroying enemy aircraft with brief bursts. German aviation experts remained skeptical, questioning whether these reports were exaggerated or if the Japanese adversaries were simply inferior to the seasoned Luftwaffe pilots defending the Reich. The capture of Lieutenant Matalia's Corsair in July of 1944 provided German experts with their inaugural opportunity to closely examine the F4U and ascertain the veracity of the reports regarding its capabilities. The aircraft was transported by sea to Narvik, subsequently shipped to Germany for meticulous analysis at the Air Proving Ground Command, Erprobungskommando, Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's principal aircraft testing facility. At Rechlin, German engineers and test pilots had meticulously examined captured Allied aircraft throughout the duration of the war. They had evaluated American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, British Spitfires and Hurricanes, and Soviet fighters captured on the Eastern Front. Each assessment yielded valuable intelligence regarding Allied capabilities and aided German designers in refining their own aircraft. However, the examination of the captured Corsair would reveal performance characteristics that astounded even seasoned German aviation experts. The initial indication of the Corsair's advanced design became apparent during the preliminary inspection. German technicians were deeply impressed by the aircraft's sophisticated construction, characterized by its all-metal airframe, advanced aerodynamics, and exceptionally powerful engine. The R-2800 Double Wasp was significantly larger and more potent than any engine employed in German fighters, generating nearly 50% more power than the engines powering contemporary Bf-19s and WWIIs. When German test pilots finally had the opportunity to fly the captured Corsair, their reactions were a complex blend of admiration and profound concern. The aircraft's performance exceeded their expectations in virtually every conceivable metric. It was faster than any German fighter in level flight, capable of climbing at rates that matched or surpassed their best interceptors, and possessed a structural integrity that enabled it to withstand G-forces that would have incapacitated other aircraft. Perhaps most disconcerting for the German pilots was the dawning realization that the Corsair represented a new generation of American military technology. Unlike earlier American fighters, which often bore the hallmarks of design compromises or expedient manufacturing shortcuts, the F4U exhibited a level of engineering sophistication and industrial capability that indicated the United States had fully mobilized its technological resources for wartime production. The implications were sobering. If the Americans could produce fighters of this caliber in substantial quantities, it would fundamentally reconfigure the balance of aerial power. German pilots, who had become accustomed to engaging Allied aircraft on relatively equal footing, would find themselves confronted by adversaries possessing significant performance advantages. The air war over Europe, which had already begun to tilt in favor of the Allies, might become even more challenging for the Luftwaffe. However, this realization would arrive too late to substantially influence German fighter development. By mid-1944, Germany's aviation industry was grappling with critical shortages of materials, extensive damage to factories from bombing raids, and the diversion of resources towards the development of jet aircraft. The opportunity to engineer new piston engine fighters capable of matching the Corsair's performance had largely passed. As the captured Corsair underwent rigorous testing at Rechlin, the aerial conflict continued to evolve in ways that would ultimately determine the fate of nations. In the Pacific, Corsair squadrons provided crucial support for the American island-hopping campaign, offering aerial cover for amphibious assaults and assaulting Japanese positions across the Central Pacific. Each mission underscored the aircraft's versatility and effectiveness, contributing to a combat record that would solidify the F4U's status as one of World War II's premier fighter aircraft. The narrative of how American engineers conceived and constructed a fighter capable of outperforming Germany's finest warplanes transcends a mere account of technical achievement. It embodies the profound transformation of American industrial capacity, the unwavering dedication of engineers and laborers who forged revolutionary technology under the immense pressures of wartime, and the extraordinary valor of pilots who bravely piloted these advanced machines into combat against formidable adversaries. Nevertheless, the full extent of the Corsair's capabilities would not become truly apparent until later in the war, when enhanced variants of the aircraft would exhibit even greater performance superiority over their opponents. The F4U that crash-landed in Norway marked merely the inception of a technological revolution that would fundamentally reshape aerial warfare and leave German pilots struggling to comprehend the source of the Americans' dramatic ascendancy in fighter design and performance. The captured Corsair at Rechlin represented more than just an advanced aerial combat machine. It served as concrete evidence of America's ascendance as the world's preeminent aerospace power, and offered a glimpse into the technological dominance that would define the post-war era. During the summer of 1944, as Lieutenant Matali's captured Corsair was en route to Erprobungskommando Rechlin, German test pilots and engineers anticipated what they believed would be a routine evaluation of yet another Allied aircraft. They had examined numerous captured machines previously, American Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and Lightnings, along with British Spitfires and Hurricanes. Each assessment typically followed a predictable pattern: a thorough inspection, flight testing, a performance comparison with German fighters, and recommendations for tactical countermeasures. However, the F4U Corsair would utterly shatter their expectations, compelling them to confront an uncomfortable reality concerning the evolving nature of aerial combat. The initial shock manifested during the preliminary ground inspection. German engineers were accustomed to examining Allied aircraft and identifying evidence of design compromises, weight penalties incurred by naval operational requirements, or performance sacrifices made for the sake of simplified production. The Corsair exhibited none of these familiar shortcomings. Instead, they discovered an aircraft that appeared to embody a new echelon of engineering sophistication. The formidable Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine immediately commanded their attention. With its output of 2,000 horsepower, it generated nearly 50% more power than the engines powering Germany's frontline fighters. The BMW 801 radial engine powering the Focke-Wulf 190 produced approximately 1,700 horsepower, while the Daimler-Benz DB 605 engine in the Messerschmitt Bf 109 delivered around 1,450 horsepower. The Americans had not merely opted for a larger engine, they had engineered a power plant that represented a generational leap in technological advancement. German technicians marveled at the engine's intricate systems. The R2800 featured cutting-edge metallurgy, precision manufacturing techniques, and a level of reliability that surpassed anything produced in Germany. Even more concerning was the realization that this was not a prototype or experimental engine, but a production power plant manufactured in considerable quantities for operational aircraft. The industrial capacity required to mass-produce such advanced engines suggested that American wartime production had reached levels that German planners had not fully appreciated. The airframe itself revealed equally sophisticated engineering. The inverted gull-wing configuration was not merely an aesthetic choice, but an ingenious resolution to multiple engineering challenges. German designers recognized the elegance of this design, which provided crucial ground clearance for the massive propeller while simultaneously optimizing aerodynamics at the wing-to-fuselage junction. The fully retractable landing gear, with its innovative 90-degree retraction sequence, was years ahead of contemporary German fighter designs. Every detail of the Corsair's construction bore the imprint of American industrial might. The aircraft's aluminum structure was fabricated to tolerances that German factories, struggling with material scarcity and the impacts of bombing, could no longer consistently achieve. The hydraulic systems, electrical components, and even the cockpit instrumentation displayed a level of sophistication that rendered German fighters seemingly primitive by comparison. During the flight testing phase, the captured Corsair's performance capabilities elicited reactions from German test pilots that transcended mere professional admiration, bordering on genuine astonishment. Hermann Friedrich von Steiger, one of Rechlin's most experienced test pilots, would later recount his initial flight in the F4U as a profound revelation. The aerial prowess demonstrated by the aircraft across all operational envelopes significantly outpaced that of its German counterparts, often by considerable margins. In level flight, the Corsair exhibited speeds unattainable by any German fighter. While the most advanced iterations of the Bf-109 could attain speeds of approximately 400 miles per hour, and the F-190 could achieve similar velocities at optimal altitudes, the F4U consistently maintained speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour across a broad spectrum of altitudes. Crucially, it could sustain these speeds even when equipped with external fuel tanks or ordnance, a capability that severely hampered the performance of German aircraft. Its rate of climb was equally remarkable. German aviators had become accustomed to the exceptional initial ascent rates of their own fighters, particularly the Bf-109, which could rapidly gain altitude from a standstill. However, the Corsair's sustained climb capability, propelled by its formidable engine, enabled it to reach operational altitudes more quickly than any German fighter and to maintain superior performance throughout its ascent. Perhaps the most disconcerting aspect for German pilots was the Corsair's agility in aerial combat. While German fighters such as the F-190 were lauded for their high-speed handling and roll rates, the F4U either matched or surpassed these attributes while also showcasing superior vertical maneuverability. The American fighter possessed the ability to ascend and descend at rates that allowed it to dictate the tempo and geometry of aerial engagements. Major Hans Kolbo, another evaluation pilot at Rechlin, concentrated his assessment on the Corsair's combat effectiveness against German adversaries. His findings were stark. In simulated combat scenarios, the F4U's performance advantages were so pronounced that German pilots would be compelled to adopt defensive strategies irrespective of their proficiency. The American fighter could initiate or disengage combat at will, attack from advantageous positions, and extricate itself from disadvantageous situations with a speed that outpaced German pilots' ability to react. The comparison of armament was equally unsettling. The Corsair's machine guns, chambered for 65 hundredths of a caliber, while lacking the explosive projectiles of German cannon, delivered a volume of fire capable of disabling most aircraft with a brief engagement. More significantly, the high velocity and flat trajectory of the 50 caliber rounds rendered them effective at greater distances than the mixed armaments typically found on German fighters. American pilots could commence firing earlier and maintain effective fire at ranges where German pilots would struggle to acquire their targets. German aeronautical engineers also examined the Corsair's potential for diverse combat roles. They determined that the aircraft's robust airframe and potent engine endowed it with exceptional adaptability. Unlike German fighters, which were often specialized for particular functions, the Bf-109 as an interceptor, the FW-190 as a fighter bomber, the F4U could fulfill multiple missions with comparable efficacy. It could serve as a dedicated interceptor, an escort for bomber formations, a close air support aircraft, or even a reconnaissance platform without substantial compromises in performance. This versatility carried significant strategic implications. German commanders were accustomed to confronting Allied formations where distinct aircraft types performed specialized missions, such as P-51 Mustangs for escort duties and P-47 Thunderbolts for ground attack. The Corsair's capacity to transition between roles mid-mission meant that German defenders would face unpredictable threats capable of adapting to evolving tactical circumstances. The assessment team at Rechlin also conducted comprehensive comparisons between the captured F4U and other captured Allied fighter aircraft. These trials revealed that the Corsair represented a substantial leap forward from earlier American designs. While aircraft such as the P-47 Thunderbolt were fast and well-armed, they lacked the maneuverability and climb performance that made the F4U so formidable. The P-51 Mustang, which had already proven a challenging adversary for German fighters, possessed superior maneuverability compared to the Corsair, but fell short in terms of speed and firepower advantages. Perhaps most alarming was the realization that the captured Corsair was not even the most current variant in Allied service. Intelligence reports indicated that newer versions equipped with even more powerful engines were already in production. The F4U-4, powered by an enhanced R2800 engine generating 2,450 horsepower, promised performance exceeding even the impressive capabilities of the captured aircraft. German test pilots also noted the Corsair's pilot-friendly characteristics. Unlike German fighters, which often demanded considerable pilot skill for safe operation, the F-4U was relatively forgiving and easy to manage. This implied that American training programs could produce proficient Corsair pilots more rapidly than German programs could train pilots for their more demanding aircraft. In a conflict increasingly defined by attrition, the ability to expedite the training of effective air crews became as vital as aircraft performance itself. The psychological impact of these revelations on German aviation personnel was profound. Many had held the conviction that German engineering superiority would eventually yield fighters capable of matching or surpassing Allied designs. The Corsair evaluation compelled them to confront the reality that American aircraft had not only closed the technological gap with Germany, but had surpassed it in numerous critical areas. This technological disparity was exacerbated by production realities. Even if German designers could conceive of fighters matching the Corsair's performance, the industrial capacity to manufacture them in significant quantities no longer existed. American factories were churning out thousands of advanced fighters monthly, whereas German production was declining due to material scarcity, the ravages of bombing campaigns, and the disarray of a collapsing wartime economy. The Rechlin evaluation also illuminated the sophistication of American manufacturing techniques. The Corsair's structural integrity, assembly precision, finish, and reliability were testaments to industrial processes that German factories could no longer emulate. American workers, operating in secure, well-equipped facilities with abundant materials, were producing aircraft to standards that a war-torn German industry could not achieve. Concurrently, in the Pacific Theater, Corsair squadrons were demonstrating the aircraft's prowess in increasingly arduous combat situations. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 highlighted the F-4U's effectiveness in large-scale naval operations. Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons, operating from both land bases and aircraft carriers, contributed to achieving decisive air superiority over Japanese forces. The Royal Navy's experience with the Corsair in European waters provided further validation of the aircraft's capabilities. British pilots operating F-4Us from aircraft carriers in the North Atlantic and North Sea found the American fighter to be superior to their own aircraft in most performance metrics. Although British Corsairs did not engage German fighters in combat, their operational deployment in the challenging North Atlantic environment underscored the aircraft's dependability and versatility. German intelligence agencies attempted to glean further information regarding Corsair operations and capabilities, but the security surrounding Allied aircraft development made detailed intelligence acquisition difficult. The limited information they did obtain painted an increasingly alarming picture of American aviation technology advancing at an unprecedented pace. The advent of jet aircraft offered some solace to German aviation. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter promised capabilities rivaling those of the Corsair. However, jet technology remained in its nascent stages, plagued by reliability issues and material shortages that constrained operational effectiveness. The few Me-262s that entered combat operations showcased the potential of jet propulsion but also exposed the challenges of deploying revolutionary technology under wartime pressures. For German piston engine fighter development, the Corsair evaluation marked a watershed moment. It became evident that conventional approaches to fighter design could not contend with American achievements. The Focke-Wulf Tu-152, Germany's most advanced piston engine fighter, represented the zenith of German engineering, yet it still could not match the Corsair's comprehensive performance envelope. The captured F-4U also revealed the extent of American material superiority. The aircraft's construction incorporated strategic resources, high-grade aluminum alloys, specialized steels, and advanced rubber compounds that were in desperately short supply in Germany. Even if German engineers could design superior aircraft, the materials required for their construction were simply unavailable in the quantities necessary for meaningful production. As 1944 transitioned into 1945, the performance disparity between German and American fighters continued to expand. Subsequent Corsair variants exhibited even greater capabilities, while German fighter production dwindled and pilot training standards deteriorated due to fuel shortages and the relentless pressure of defending German airspace against overwhelming Allied air assaults. The narrative of the captured Corsair at Rechlin became emblematic of the shifting technological and industrial balance of World War II. German pilots, who had once enjoyed air supremacy over their adversaries, found themselves confronting aircraft that surpassed their capabilities in virtually every performance category. The psychological impact of this technological inferiority contributed to a decline in morale among Luftwaffe personnel, who recognized that their individual skill and bravery could no longer compensate for inferior equipment. The F4U Corsair represented more than just an advanced fighter aircraft. It embodied American industrial and technological might at its wartime peak. The engineering teams responsible for its creation, the workers who manufactured it, and the pilots who flew it into battle had achieved something that had seemed unattainable mere years prior: air superiority through technological dominance. For German pilots who encountered reports of Corsair performance or who studied the intelligence gathered from the captured aircraft, the implications were undeniable. The aerial conflict had fundamentally transformed, and the technological advantages that had once favored German aviation had decisively shifted to the Allies. The era of American air power had commenced, with aircraft like the F4U Corsair serving as its heralds. Ultimately, the German evaluation of the captured Corsair corroborated the experiences of Allied pilots in combat. The F4U represented a new generation of fighter aircraft that harmonized speed, firepower, and versatility in ways that previous designs had never accomplished. The astonished reactions of German pilots and engineers at Rechlin reflected not merely professional admiration for superior technology, but a recognition that the balance of air power had irrevocably and decisively shifted against the Luftwaffe. The distinctive bent-wing fighter, having crash-landed in a Norwegian field, had revealed the future trajectory of aerial warfare. A future in which American technological and industrial preeminence would reshape the global equilibrium of power and lay the groundwork for decades of aerospace dominance.